The day a realtor showed up at my house to take listing photos, I realized my daughter-in-law had been making plans behind my back. She thought I'd eventually give in. What she didn't know was that I'd already made one decision she could never undo. Brielle knelt by the living room baseboard, pulling a stiff yellow tape measure across the hardwood. She did not ask before moving the cedar chest that had belonged to my late husband, Thomas. She simply shoved it 2 inches to the left, letting the brass corner scrape the poly finish. My son Calvin stood near the hallway archway, holding a cardboard tray of iced lattes from the drive-thru down on Elm Street. He was staring down at his phone, his thumb flicking upward in steady, nervous strokes. "The square footage in this front room is completely wasted on heavy furniture," Brielle said, snapping the metal blade back into its plastic housing. "If we knock out this non-load-bearing partition between the kitchen and the dining space, the whole floor plan breathes. We can list it 40,000 higher by next spring." I set my ceramic mug onto a cork coaster on the side table. At 64, after working 30 years as a county land surveyor, I knew every single load-bearing stud property line and soil condition in this zip code. I had watched Thomas pour the foundation footings with his own hands back in '94. "The cedar stays where it is, Brielle," I said, quietly keeping my tone level. She turned around with a bright, tight smile that did not touch her eyes. "Mom, we have to look at the market realistically. You spend half your week weeding a half-acre garden you can barely maintain alone. A townhouse near the medical center would give you 0 maintenance, and Calvin wouldn't have to drive over every weekend to check the gutters." Calvin had not cleaned the gutters since October. I hired the high school boy down the road to do it every November. I stood up, walked past Brielle without answering, and slid the cedar chest back to its exact sun-faded mark on the floorboards. 3 weeks later, the visits stopped being casual pop-ins and turned into structured assessments. Brielle arrived on Sunday afternoon carrying a faux leather binder packed with color swatches, printed real estate comps from our neighborhood, and business cards for estate liquidators. She set the binder directly on my kitchen island right beside the cutting board, where I was dicing celery for chicken salad. "Calvin's firm is opening that new branch in Raleigh next year," Brielle announced, pulling out a laminated spreadsheet. "The down payment on a 4-bedroom in that district is astronomical right now. If we wait until the housing bubble cools, we lose our leverage. But if we liquidate this parcel before the interest rates hike again, everyone wins." Calvin sat at the breakfast nook, peeling the label off a bottle of sparkling water. "Mom, she just means the timing makes sense. The roof is going to need shingles in 2 years anyway. Why sink $15,000 into an old structure when you could downsize?" "The roof was replaced after the hailstorm 4 years ago. Calvin," I said, slicing through a stalk of celery with an even rhythmic chop. "I paid the invoice in cash. You signed the warranty transfer for me when my wrist was sprained." He blinked, shifting his weight on the wooden chair. "Right. I forgot." Brielle did not miss a beat. She tapped a pen against her binder. "The point is the equity. Keeping $300,000 trapped in dry sheetrock while your son commutes 40 minutes each way doesn't make financial sense. We need to consolidate family assets." She used the word family the way a bank manager uses collateral. I wiped the stainless steel blade with a clean kitchen towel, placed it in the wooden block, and took my gardening gloves from the windowsill. "I have tomatoes to prune before the sun gets too high," I said, walking toward the screen door. I stopped cooking the large Tuesday dinners that Calvin had counted on since he moved into his rental apartment 4 miles north. For 5 years, Tuesday had meant pot roast warm biscuits and doing his laundry in my heavy-duty basement machines while he watched ball games in the recliner. When Brielle moved in with him last winter, the Tuesday routine had expanded to include her special grocery requests and containers of leftovers packed for her office lunches. On the first Tuesday of July, Calvin arrived at 5:30, carrying 2 baskets of dirty work shirts. The kitchen was dark. The counters were bare, except for a small note sitting beside my set of spare house keys on the granite island. "Calvin." I have joined the Regional Botanical Preservation Committee. Meetings are Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6. The laundromat on 4th Street has high-capacity commercial washers. When I returned home at 8:15, the laundry baskets were gone, but Calvin was sitting on the front porch steps in the humid evening dusk. He stood up as my sedan pulled into the driveway. "Mom, you didn't answer your cell," he said, crossing his arms. "Brielle needed those white blouses pressed for her presentation tomorrow morning. We thought you were just running late at the grocery store." My phone was on silent during the guest lecture. I replied, taking my canvas tote bag from the passenger seat. I walked up the porch steps, unlocked the deadbolt, and held the door open just wide enough for myself. "You could have told us earlier," he muttered, following me into the entryway. "We had to buy takeout." "I am adjusting my calendar, Calvin. You are 32 years old. A dry cleaner is 3 blocks from your office." I did not offer him a seat, nor did I turn on the living room television. The pressure shifted from subtle suggestions to active encroachment during the second week of August. I was weeding the hydrangeas along the front walkway when a white crossover SUV parked at the curb. A woman in a tailored navy blazer stepped out carrying a clip folder and a digital camera on a shoulder strap. "Hello," the woman said, offering a professional business card. "I'm Sarah from Oak Ridge Realty. Brielle told me I could stop by to take preliminary exterior photos for the off-market preview listing." My fingers tightened around the trowel. "Brielle does not hold title to this property." The agent looked down at her notes, visibly flustered. "She indicated that the estate was being prepared for family transfer this quarter. She sent over the floor measurements last Tuesday." "Brielle is my son's wife," I said, standing up and brushing the dry garden mulch from my denim apron. "She has no legal authority to list, show, or photograph this residence. If you step onto the grass, you are trespassing." The agent apologized quickly, got back into her vehicle, and drove away. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Brielle. Her voice was sharp, stripped of its usual sweet polish. "Mom, what did you say to Sarah?" "She just called me in a panic. We paid a $200 consultation fee to get that listing assessment done before the autumn slowdown." "You wasted $200, I told her plainly. "Calvin and I are trying to secure our future," she snapped. "You are sitting on 4 bedrooms while we pay rent to a landlord who won't even fix our air conditioning. It's selfish, Audrey. We are family, and you are treating us like strangers. This conversation is over," I said, and disconnected the call. For the first time in 10 years, I locked the back screen door from the inside. That evening, I went down to the basement where Thomas had built his woodworking bench and filing storage. In the bottom drawer of the steel cabinet sat the original deed to the house, stamped by the county clerk in 1994, along with our property tax receipts and mortgage satisfaction letter from the bank. I pulled out the manila folder and sat under the bare fluorescent bulb. When Thomas died 5 years ago, the mortgage was entirely paid. The property was unencumbered, worth roughly $420,000 in the current suburban market. Calvin had assumed, because he was an only child, that the succession was a straight, simple line from his father to him. He had told Brielle as much. The problem was not that they wanted a house. The problem was that they viewed my life here as an inconvenient pause in their financial timeline. Brielle saw a ledger entry. Calvin saw a safety net that required no effort on his part. I took the deed upstairs, placed it inside my leather briefcase, and drove into the downtown legal district the following morning. My appointment was with Arthur Vance, an attorney who had handled land disputes for the county during my years as a surveyor. "I need to restructure the title," I told Arthur, setting the original paperwork on his desk. "I want full clarity on record. No assumptions. No room for pressure tactics." Arthur reviewed the survey maps, the deed, and the tax filings over his reading glasses. "This is very straightforward, Audrey. If this is what you want, we can have the documents drafted, signed, and registered at the county recorder's office by Friday afternoon." "Do it," I said, "and make 3 certified copies." I left his office, bought myself a sandwich at the diner across the street, and felt the knot in my stomach untie. By mid-September, I had completely rebuilt my daily life around my own priorities. I signed up for a Saturday morning pottery class. At the community college, joined a walking group that met 3 mornings a week at the county park, and hired a local carpenter to convert the smallest upstairs bedroom into a dedicated sewing studio. Calvin called twice a week, but his tone had become guarded. Brielle was clearly coaching him in the background. I could hear the faint click of her laptop keys whenever he paused to find his words. "Mom, Brielle's parents are visiting from Ohio next month," Calvin said during a Sunday evening call. "We don't have room in our apartment. We were thinking they could take your guest room for the week, and maybe we could host a family dinner here to smooth things over." "The guest room is currently being painted," I replied. "There is a very comfortable Marriott near the highway exit. I will be happy to meet everyone for lunch at the bistro on Saturday." "A hotel costs $160 a night, Mom," he said, frustration bleeding through his voice. "Why do you have to make everything so difficult lately? You used to love having company." "I enjoy company when it is invited, Calvin. I am not running a bed and breakfast to absorb your in-laws' travel expenses." "Brielle thinks you hate her," he said bluntly. "Brielle thinks my home is an asset waiting for liquidation," I countered. "Those are 2 very different things. If you want to take me to lunch next week, you are welcome to come alone. Otherwise, I will see you at Thanksgiving." He hung up without saying goodbye. I did not call him back. Instead, I spent the evening cutting fabric for new living room curtains. The confrontation I knew was coming finally arrived on the first Sunday of October. Calvin texted me at noon asking if he and Brielle could come over for coffee to clear the air. I agreed, but I left the front porch lights off and kept the living room curtains drawn. They arrived at 2 o'clock sharp. Brielle was dressed in business casual, a blazer and dark trousers, carrying a slim leather portfolio under her arm. Calvin followed behind her, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the patterned entryway rug. They sat on the sofa. I sat across from them in Thomas's old armchair, wearing a plain cardigan, a cup of black tea resting in my hands. Brielle placed her portfolio on the wooden coffee table, unzipped it, and pulled out a stapled document. Her posture was rigid, rehearsed, and brimming with artificial confidence. Mom, we need to talk about your house." Brielle began sliding the document toward the center of the table. "We have tried to be subtle, but the situation is becoming urgent. Calvin's promotion depends on our relocation equity. We had a loan officer run the numbers on a cash-out refinance under a co-ownership agreement." I looked down at the document. It was a loan application form with my name already typed in the co-borrower section, accompanied by a quitclaim deed template that would add Calvin and Brielle to the title as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. "You had a mortgage broker prepare paperwork using my property address without my consent?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Calvin is your only heir," Brielle said firmly, leaning forward. "Adding us to the deed protects the house from probate taxes later. It allows us to access the equity now while you retain the right to live here in the lower suite. It is the only sensible move." Calvin kept his hands clasped tightly between his knees. He would not look at the coffee table, nor would he look at me. "Calvin," I said, "look at me." He slowly raised his chin. His face was flushed red. "Mom, the housing market in Raleigh is impossible. If we don't buy this fall, we are priced out forever. Brielle's father offered to match our down payment if we can pull $80,000 from this place. It's sitting right here in the walls. You don't even use the equity. You want me to borrow against the roof over my head so you can buy a house you cannot afford on your own salary," I stated. "We would make the monthly payments," Brielle interjected, her voice rising in pitch. "We are trying to build generational wealth. That is what parents are supposed to do for their children. You are hoarding a 4-bedroom house out of stubbornness while your son struggles to get ahead. Calvin deserves his inheritance while it can actually help him, not when he's 50 years old. Inheritance." I repeated, letting the word hang in the quiet room. "You talk about my death as if it were a scheduled closing date on a real estate contract. That is not what she means, Mom," Calvin mumbled, though his defense was half-hearted and hollow. It is exactly what she means, I said. And it is what you have allowed her to say because you are too weak to tell her that you did not build this house, you did not pay for it, and you have no claim to it. Brielle scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. Calvin is the sole heir. Legally, this house will be his anyway. We are just asking you to be practical before the market turns. I set my teacup down. The porcelain clicked against the saucer. I reached into the side pocket of my armchair, pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope, and placed it flat on the wooden table. My daughter-in-law kept talking about what should happen to my house. I said nothing, just slid the deed across the table. Brielle reached out her manicured fingers, pulling the documents from the envelope. She expected to see the original 1994 county deed, with my name and Thomas's name. She expected to see a title she could pressure me into altering. She flipped to the first page. She read the bold header. Her eyes scanned down to the registrar's seal, the notary stamp, and the property conveyance clause. Her face changed instantly. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin pale and blotchy. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Calvin leaned over, squinting at the text. "Mom, what did you do?" "That is the recorded deed to this property as of last Friday." I said, my voice steady, clear, and quiet. "I transferred the house and the half-acre parcel into an irrevocable land trust managed by the County Historical Preservation Board." Brielle's hands began to tremble as she flipped to the third page. You gave it away?" "I have a lifetime tenancy," I continued. "I can live here until the day I die. But the property cannot be sold, mortgaged, refinanced, or transferred. It cannot be used as collateral for a bank loan. And when I pass away, the house becomes a permanent community educational center for botanical studies named after your father." "You disinherited me?" Calvin choked out, his eyes wide with shock. "I removed the house from the equation," I said. "Your inheritance is whatever cash remains in my personal savings when I am gone. This home will never be your bargaining chip." Brielle dropped the paperwork onto the table as if the pages had burned her skin. She stood up so violently that her handbag slipped from the sofa and hit the floor with a dull thud. "You are out of your mind," she hissed, her voice trembling with pure rage. "You ruined everything. Do you realize what you just did to Calvin's career? To our plans? Your plans were built on property that was never yours to spend," I said, standing up to face her. "You saw me as an obstacle, sitting on top of an asset. Now the asset is gone. You and Calvin can build your lives on your own labor exactly as Thomas and I built ours." Brielle grabbed her bag, turned on her heel, and marched out the front door, letting the heavy screen slam shut behind her. Calvin remained on the sofa for another minute. He stared at the blue notary seal on the trust document. There were tears in his eyes, but they were tears of embarrassment, not grief. "Why didn't you just tell me, Mom?" he asked quietly. "Because you weren't listening, Calvin. You were waiting for me to step aside." I walked to the front door and held it open. "Go home to your wife. Learn how to pay your own way. When you are ready to visit your mother instead of a landlord, my door is open." He stood up, walked past me onto the porch without another word, and got into the passenger seat of their car. I watched them back out of the driveway and disappear down Elm Street. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet, solid, and entirely mine. I put the kettle on the stove, turned on the burner, and began preparing my dinner in peace.